Hi, thanks for coming to read with me today. I'm going to be reading Vision of Beauty, the story of Sarah Breedlove Walker. So, this is a story about the life of, sometimes she's better known as Madame C.J. Walker. So, in class, we read this biography, and we've been reading this picture book version to see, in many ways, both a more complex text and also a more detailed version of some really important aspects of her life. So, the piece that I'm going to read today, um, we've taken a look at the author's note and the very first section of her life in class. And the remainder of the book may have some trigger warnings, especially regarding racism and segregation in the American South. So I'm going to share a version of my screen and uh, read along. Okay, so I had to pause the recording for a moment there. I think we are good now. And I'm going to continue reading Vision of Beauty, the story of Sarah Breedlove Walker. I don't know if my video will move around or not. My students started to read this on December 1st, so that's why we see that here on their slides version. So this was written by Catherine Lasky and illustrated by Neka Bennett. My apologies if I mispronounced either of those names. Okay. This piece is called Delta, Louisiana, mid-1870s. The sun was just coppering the cotton fields when the Breedloves got there each morning. Sarah had worked in the fields since she was 5 years old, first carrying water, then planting seeds in the freshly turned earth. By the time she was 10, she would be old enough to push a plow. After 12 hours in the cotton fields, Sarah returned home with her family and began digging potatoes for the next night's supper. Then she fed the chickens and swept the yard. On Saturdays, Minerva Breedlove and the two girls washed their own clothes and those of white people. For this, they were paid $1 a week. Most of the time, it was blistering hot. In the fields, Sarah and her mother and sister kept their heads tightly wrapped in bandanas or do-rags to soak up the sweat and protect their hair from the sun. On Sundays, they unwrapped their heads from their do-rags and went to church. If Minerva Breedlove had time and wanted her girls to look especially nice, she would divide their hair into sections, twist each one tightly, and tie it with string. Their scalps felt so tight that Sarah and Luvenia could hardly blink or smile. When the hair was combed out, it was straighter, less nappy and knotty, which made Sarah almost forget the pain. This section is about their life in Delta, Louisiana, then Vicksburg, Mississippi, from 1875 to 1882. Yellow fever, consumption, and cholera were constant threats in the hot, humid, low-lying towns near the Mississippi River. Weakened by poverty and hard labor, Owen and Minerva Breedlove could not easily fight such diseases. By 1875, Sarah, Lavinia, and Alex were orphaned, right? Remember, her parents died. That's what this means. Sarah was only 7 years old. She missed her parents desperately, and she missed their dreams. Alex soon moved to Vicksburg, a bigger town across the river, to look for work. Sarah and Lavinia had to do laundry day and night. It was the only way they could survive. The girls were lucky to escape these diseases, but many of the white people who paid them to do laundry died. Then the crops failed in the Mississippi Delta. There was no way for the girls to make money. To escape their troubles, Sarah and Lavinia would walk down to the river and watch the passengers getting off the ferry from Vicksburg. Sarah loved to see the women travelers. Their thick hair poofed out like glossy blossoms from under big, beautiful hats. She could almost hear the swish of the fancy dresses, but something more than the women's clothes caught Sarah's eye. It was their proud looks, the confident way they held their heads and carried themselves. At last, the girls decided to cross the river to Vicksburg themselves, where they heard there was more work. They took the same boat the grand ladies took, except that Sarah and Lavinia were painfully thin. Okay, there may have been a microphone error in that section. So I am going to start here in this paragraph that begins soon. Just remember, please, that in this text, the authors have chosen, right? They've chosen to use this word, right? Colored people, right? That was a very common use at the time. In class, I have tended to use a term um, such as African American, just to refer to people who of a dark skin color, probably with African roots, who may have been previously lived had been slaves in the United States. Soon after Sarah and Lavinia got to Vicksburg, a traveling preacher began to spread the word that a ship would come to carry colored people to freedom and safety in Africa. Crowds of people waited by the river, dreaming of deliverance, but the ship never came. Sarah's life was almost worse than it had been in Delta. Lavinia had married a cruel, dangerous man, and the three were crowded together in a small shack. When Sarah could stand it no longer, she married a Vicksburg laborer named Moses McWilliams to get away. She was 14 years old. The next section says St. Louis, Missouri, late 1880s. Sarah called out to her daughter Lilia not to run out of the yard. Sweat was streaming from her bandana. Her back ached as she turned and plunged her hands into the wash tub again. Sarah was not yet 20, but she was already a mother and a widow. Moses McWilliams had been a good man, but he died before Lilia turned 3. Sarah had moved to St. Louis, where she had heard laundresses could earn good money. St. Louis was a flashy town, full of noise and ragtime music, Saloons and dance halls, gamblers and musicians, hustlers and hardworking folks. And it had one of the country's largest colored communities. Every night when Sarah finished her work, she would take off her bandana and find broken strands of hair. Years of poor nutrition and hard labor had left her hair brittle and unhealthy, and now Sarah was going bald. She had tried many of the so called cures and products guaranteed to make hair grow: La Creole Hair Restorer, Queen Pomade, Kinkilla, but none worked. Many made her hair worse. Sarah had spent time in women's kitchens as they tried to straighten and restore their hair. The air was filled with the smells of hot grease, melting wax, and harsh chemicals as the women's hair was fried and their scalps were burned. Several evenings a week, Sarah put on her best dress and collected money for St. Paul's African Methodist Episcopal Church. The church meant a great deal to Sarah. Before the Civil War, when it was illegal for colored people to go to school, the church had defied the law and taught them to read and write. Although she was only a poor laundress, each week Sarah put aside a small part of her wages. She was determined to give her daughter the education she had dreamed of for herself. By 1902, Sarah had saved enough money to send Lilia to Knoxville College, a small colored school in Tennessee. This section is about St. Louis, Missouri in 1904. The 1904 St. Louis World's Fair lasted the whole year, filling the city with excitement. Famous people were there, famous white folks and famous colored folks like the poet Paul Laurence Dunbar and the scholar W.E.B. Du Bois, the newspaper tycoon T. Thomas Fortune, and the educator Booker T. Washington. Sarah was present the night that Margaret Washington, wife of Booker T., addressed the St. Louis chapter of the National Association of Colored Women, NACW. She spoke of the development of colored women, reminding her audience of the NACW's motto, lifting as we climb. Not only was Margaret Washington well spoken, she was immaculately dressed. Her posture was proud and erect. Her hair was thick and healthy. Mrs. Washington seemed like those grand ladies coming off the ferry boat in Delta so long ago. She had their confidence, their independence. That was what Sarah wanted, but how to achieve it? That night, when Sarah returned home, she got down on her knees and she prayed to God. She prayed for one very simple thing: that her hair not fall out anymore. The next morning, there was still hair on Sarah's pillow, but she did not despair. She knew what to do. For that night, she had had a dream of Africa. In it, she saw the earth, the soil, the vast grassy savannas. She saw the plants, the trees, the flowers, the leaves. And she imagined the natural oils and other ingredients that were produced by this vegetation, ingredients that she could use on her hair. Sarah got busy right away. She began searching out the ingredients and discovering what herbs and oils were to be found in the United States. Some of the ingredients, like Tedder salve and sulfur petrolatum, she sent away for. Others she was able to purchase in local pharmacies. I'm going to pause one moment and see if I can find a cough drop. Okay, sorry for the delay. The next section says Denver, Colorado, 1905 to 1908. When Sarah learned that her brother Alex had died, she moved to Denver to be near his wife and children. She rented an attic room there and set up a makeshift laboratory, surrounding herself with pots and glass beakers filled with mixtures. Sarah adjusted and refined and remixed to get the formulas just right, making careful notes in her wobbly handwriting. She spelled as best she could, but her writing was far from perfect. Sarah could work on her formulas only at night. During the day, she was a cook for Mr. E. L. Schultz, who owned the largest pharmacy in Denver. Some of the ingredients and chemicals she used were the same as those carried in his pharmacy. When Sarah made a batch she thought was right, she tried it. Soon her hair started growing in faster than it had ever fallen out. Though the ingredients she used were strong, they did not burn hair, and when they were mixed in the right combination, they healed the scalp and made hair healthy. Sarah decided to go into business for herself. Soon she had three products ready for sale: vegetable shampoo, wonderful hair grower, and Glossine. She began going door to door, giving demonstrations in colored women's kitchens. First, she would wash a woman's hair with the vegetable shampoo. Next, she would apply the wonderful hair grower to nourish her scalp. And then, with a specially designed metal comb heated on the glass stove, she would press in the Glossine, a light oil that softened the woman's tight curls. I just want to say this is like one of my favorite illustrations of this story, right? I can, to have this in our movie as we read of Sarah mixing the ingredients here in her bedroom. It really had me make a connection with the text here where it talks about her in this text how it says she went door to door to sell her hair product. And here we learn that in addition to going door to door, she would also give demonstrations in the kitchen of the house she visited. And it gives the entire process she would do to really sell her product. Let's continue. In these kitchens, Sarah never said the words bad hair, which meant kinky and nappy, or good hair, which meant straight and glossy. White women had good hair, and they were held out as models of beauty to colored women with their bad hair. Sarah thought this was insulting, right? That this was a bad thing to say, right? Good hair and bad hair. Many hair care companies, especially those owned by white people, advertised to colored women by telling them how unattractive they were. These advertisements glorified long, straight hair, while colored ministers preached against straightened hair and scolded colored women for not remaining as God made them. Sarah believed that such advertising was misleading and that what a woman did with her hair was a woman's business, not a man's. Sarah's, so this is the second part of Denver, Colorado. Let's see. Sarah's first advertisements for her new company did not use a light skinned, straight haired model. The model Sarah used was herself. Her ads emphasized health, the health of the scalp, and the length of her own healthy hair. And there was another message too. Some early ads showed two pictures of Sarah side by side. In the before picture, her hair is thin and short, and her eyes are cast down shyly. The after picture shows Sarah with long, healthy hair, looking directly into the camera. She is bolder and seems to have a clearer sense of self worth. This message was not lost on colored women. At that time, women, white and colored, were not permitted to vote or own property. Colored people in many parts of the country had even fewer rights. There were restaurants they could not eat in. There were restaurants they could not eat in, separate drinking fountains and restrooms for them, theaters and hotels they could not enter. To be a woman and colored meant that one had almost no position or status. In 1905, Sarah married Charles Walker, an old friend from St. Louis, and became Mrs. C.J. Walker. However, she chose to call herself Madame C.J. Walker. The word Madame was often associated with France, considered a worldwide center of fashion, and it conveyed an image of status and dignity. Sarah decided to name her new company with her new name. It was to be called the Madame C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. This piece is called Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 1908 to 1911. Not long after Madam Walker was married, she moved her company to Pittsburgh. There was plenty of There was plenty of steel in Pittsburgh to make the Madam Walker pressing combs, and there was a good transportation system for shipping her products. Madam Walker still sold door to door, and she and Lilia, who had finished her studies, trained her salespeople, or agents, as she called them, to go into the kitchens of colored women. All customers were viewed as future agents. The agents who sold Madam Walker products were trained to speak to customers not only about health and beauty, but about self sufficiency as well. They were offering women a vision of freedom and dignity, making money in a respected occupation as a hairdresser or saleswoman while still being good wives and mothers. When Walker agents visited their customers, they would discuss the benefits of working for the company, and they would be sure to mention that agents could start out making $5 a week. This was an impressive amount. The most a colored woman was likely to make was $2.50 a week. At that time, a colored man might make $5. A white man could expect to make $17 a week. By 1908, only 2 years after starting her company, Madame Walker had signed on nearly 100 representatives. She sold directly to customers in their homes and through the mail. The Madame C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company was making $400 a week. That same year in Pittsburgh, Madame Walker and Lilia opened the Lilia College of Hairculturists. Housekeepers, laundresses, and nursemaids flocked to the college to learn a new profession that would give them pride and financial independence. A few years later, Madam Walker left Lilia in charge of the business in Pittsburgh and moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, which was closer to the nation's center and major transportation systems. By now, the company was making more than $3,000 a week, a sum equal to more than $30,000 a week today. In 1911, for a business run by a colored woman, such earnings were almost inconceivable. Right? So here we have to imagine, right? What it would be like to be in charge of a business that made $30,000 every week, right? That was the profit. Okay. Um, this is the end of the piece that I have scanned. So, um, okay. So there may be one more piece that I want to refer to here before I stop the video. Um, okay, so I think this is going to be where I have to stop today, but let me just check one more place here in the background. Okay. Okay, so we read the section about Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we read through the end of this section. Um, in the book, there is a little bit more about her life in Indianapolis, um, and um, another time when she interacted with the Washington family, with Booker T. Washington, in a tiny bit here, but I'm going to stop this here. My students in class, I'm happy to show you the end if you would like to read more here. So thank you for reading this section with me today, and good luck with your study of Madam C.J. Walker.